Hi, welcome to the bathtub, where when you see this iconic puppy and you hear this iconic music, now wait for it, and we still stop it too quick so we don't get sued, then you know this is another episode of what used to be called Puppy Noir, but just this week it's called Puppy Spy-Noir, because we still have the same puppy. We have to keep her in work. Oh, Lucky. Poor Lucky. She doesn't like the heat, my poor dog. She's also a little insane. So we have Puppy Noir. It's Puppy Spy Noir this week because we're going to be talking about the another iconic, I like to use the word iconic, Ian Fleming's James Bond novels. That's Moonraker. These are the copies I read when I was a little kid, and my parents used to read. And I've always still preferred these editions, these old Signet editions with the James Bond thriller on the side and all that. And I'm going to let old Lucky down because it's a little too hot for her. And she needs to get down because she's a little crazy. And we're just going to chat very aimlessly again as usual. That's Dodo. I'm Bather, Master Bather. That was Bradfield, Lucky Bradfield. And that's Dodo. You think about that one too. And this is I've been kind of running behind on these pointless videos in which I talk about nothing. But today I fired up the martini a little earlier today so I could actually talk about this. And you see what we got here. Look at really carefully because we're talking about James Bond, right? That martini has been stirred, not shaken. It's been stirred, not shaken. That means James Bond would spit this in your face if you served it to him. It's also a dirty martini because I didn't wash the glass. And unlike James Bond, he likes a little peel, lemon peel, whatever it is he puts in there. I serve my martinis with blue cheese stuffed olives. So basically, James Bond would walk right out of this place. He'd walk out of here in a minute. Okay. Anyway, I'm having that much too early in the day. But trying to get a few of these done this afternoon. Good dog, Lucky. She doesn't handle the heat well. So we're just going to chat, kind of just wander through some of these old books. I read these. These were some of the first adult books I ever read when I was about 6 or 7. Because we used to go see those movies, and we saw the Dr. No and From Russia with Love at the movie theaters with our parents. And I thought they were just the coolest movies of all time when I was a little kid. And my parents used to read these. My mom particularly used to read them, but my dad didn't read much, but he read all these books too. And these are the original covers. That's the very first James Bond novel, Casino Royale. It was made into a silly comedy with Woody Allen and David Niven or something years and years ago. And then they kind of redid it. It's the closest that the one that they made about 10 years ago with the new James Bond, whose name I forget. That was kind of close to the plot of the original Casino Royale. So that's the very first James Bond novel. And frankly, if you were to go back and read or reread the James Bond novels, I would advise you to start with the very first one, Casino Royale, which I think is still kind of the best of the series. And then it was followed by Live and Let Die, which I also think is quite good. This has nothing to do with the movie, the stupid Roger Moore version. That's stupid. Daniel Craig's the new, the current James Bond. Live and Let Die was made into a really that's when the James Bond movies just became completely ridiculous when Roger Moore was in them and was constantly mugging the camera. But this is actually a good book too. The earlier books were the better ones, and they were also the shorter ones. They started to get too long, and Moonraker's pretty good too. So those are the three. Those are my three favorites in many ways of the whole James Bond series. Those first 3 or 4 novels. We'll talk about a few things here. I'm going to post a link. I did a long piece on James Bond and Ian Fleming for the New Republic, which I think sort of tells you everything I have to say about both of them. But I sort of started going back to reread my way through the James Bond books as a fairly old man, because I remember reading them as a kid and I had no idea what was happening in most of them. Okay, I read all those books when I was about 7 or 8, and I didn't quite understand what the hell was happening. I remember understanding Dr. No a little bit better. Dr. No is when it starts to turn into more of the kind of the super spy, super villain type novels. This is when you get Dr. No he's got the mechanical arms, and he sets up some sort of diabolical survival course for Bond, and that all sort of made sense to me when I was 7 or 8 years old. It was like I understand that. I understood that book better than I understood other of the novels. And I reread this recently. It's still fun. It's still sort of fun. So anyway, those are all these old novels here. What else have we got lying around here? The James Bond dossier. This is Kingsley Amos's kind of love letter. He loved James Bond, and he writes probably the most loving summary of James Bond books that I could think of. And they're intelligent and sensible. I don't know that I agree with him in some ways. One of the things I learned over the years is that any Oxbridge boys who went to Oxford or Cambridge and were in literary studies, for some reason, everyone I met like that, they all knew James Bond books inside out. And you'd sit down, whenever I would meet 2 or 3 of these people, they were constantly talking about what kind of gun he had and how he drank his olives and how he ate beefsteak, and they just remember what kind of cars he drove and which books. I don't know where they spent their lives doing this, but for some reason, something about English college university boys liked James Bond. I put this here, Mickey Spillane. We talked about Mickey Spillane in the past. He seems to be quite a big influence on the James Bond books, particularly in the first 5 or 6 volumes, which are pretty sadistic. We've talked a bit about this. There's a lot of violence, this kind of naturalistic violence in the Mickey Spillane books, which is, naturalistic, and it's this kind of jungle atmosphere. The city is this jungle, and Mike Hammer is this prowling cat trying to catch the bad guys. And then there's lots of, when they catch each other, there's often lots of torture and physical pain involved in it. And there's a lot of pain and suffering in the James Bond books, particularly to Bond. Bond gets caught and is often, you may remember the scene in Casino Royale when Le Chiffre ties him down and starts bashing his balls with that something, I forget, it was a bag full of rocks or something. That's all from the book. And that whole thing about the sadism and the sadistic physical violence in the books is common in a lot of these books. I read through all these books over the past year. We talked a little bit about this. You could see the real big influence. Ian Fleming was a big buddy of Graham Greene's. He loved Graham Greene's work. Ian Fleming was a pretty smart guy, and you could tell that Graham Greene was a great writer, and he seemed to know that he was kind of a schlocky writer. And I think he was right. I don't know that I've read through all the Ian Fleming books now, and I don't know if I ever want to read them again. I find it got a little tedious near the end. But he was influenced by John Buchan. We talked a bit about him, who's actually, I think, a better storyteller than he was. And he was very influenced by, did I put it out here? Anyway, somewhere around here, Bulldog Drummond. And we talked about Bulldog Drummond and some of the politics about how basically the Russians are trying to take over England by running the labor unions and starting strikes and giving young kids good jobs when they get out of college. There's a lot of really weird right-wing, wealthy English bullshit. Ian Fleming came from a really wealthy family. He is the biography I enjoy with the John Lycett biography. There's a new one by Oliver Buckton. I enjoyed that one. That's more of a critical analysis of some of the books. The Lycett biography has a good picture of what Fleming was like. And Fleming spent a lot of his life basically he was always getting fired from terrible jobs. He was really bad at almost everything he did. He was in the military, and there's mixed reports about whether he was any use in the intelligence services or not. I'm sure a lot of people come to the defense of him. I don't have a feeling one way or the other. He seems to have done some good things, but basically he came up with all these crazy crackpot ideas about how they were going to save the war through these crazy spy novel ideas that Ian Fleming often would get from books he read. He was a big reader. He loved reading. He was an intelligent guy. He spent most of his life just kind of avoiding life because he had the money to do it. So he spent all his time playing cards with his friends and driving sports cars and eating nice meals at nice restaurants and chasing women. John Lycett's book does a really good picture of Ian Fleming as not the successful lover he liked to pretend he was, or James Bond was. He was actually kind of a creep, he sounds like. But in the long run, what's interesting is he wrote these books, which were basically the hero, James Bond, saves the world by doing all the stuff that Ian Fleming did. Playing cards in Casino Royale, going snorkeling, Ian Fleming was a big snorkeler. Underwater stuff, this underwater fight scene in Thunderball, and all this stuff, and racing sports cars and all that stuff, and knowing how to order at restaurants. There's the whole thing about James Bond that people seem to like is that kind of snobism where he always knows what kind of sauce you should get with your fillet of sole or Dover sole, and he always orders the right thing, like his martini has to be shaken, not stirred, and so forth. And there was a lot of that in Fleming's life, it seems. He seemed to have taken all the stuff that he did that were completely useless things he did and turned them into a super spy. A couple other books I'd like to talk about just briefly. From Russia with Love, which is kind of a fun early Bond movie, was sort of also an interesting picture of how when Fleming got into the middle career, he was kind of, again, writing this kind of series character. He would try different things with the novels, which I did like about him. For example, the first third of this book, James Bond isn't even in it. He goes to Russia and he sees how the Russian bureaucracy that runs the spy agencies operate. And it's kind of an interesting little picture of how Fleming sees the Russian spy agencies as operating. This was a book, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. It's a kind of unsuccessful novel, but it's probably the most interesting of all the Bond novels, in which Fleming tried to do something different, and he got completely pilloried for it and criticized in the press. He tells it from the point of view of a woman, an English woman, who hates British middle-class life and goes to runs away from England, she says at the beginning, just to get away from that sense of this class of people who all know each other and always in each other's business and they're always judging you. And she goes to America and works in some old hotel. And this is also very similar to this Spillane type novels that Fleming obviously read. And in the course of the book, the first half of the book is basically about a woman who hates England and leaves it, and why she leaves it. And it's kind of an interesting book. And then she gets caught by these two sadists, and there's a lot of violence in it, and violence against her instead of against Bond. Usually the violence is against Bond in the books. And a lot of people found it unsettling. But it's a pretty interesting novel, and I would say that's kind of quite good. For Your Eyes Only, these are the 4 stories that he wrote. He wrote several short stories, and 5 short stories in this book. One of the stories is called Quantum of Solace, which is kind of mid to late career story of his, which I liked a lot. It was the closest to a literary story I ever read from Ian Fleming. And it's about Bond basically receiving a story. He hears the story of a man and his wife and how their marriage falls apart. And it's kind of a bit critical of Fleming's view of the world in a way. And it shows that, there was a real intelligence in there. And he also knows how to write sentences and write paragraphs. He has a really cold, objective vision of the world. And then he kind of, fetishizes this James Bond character increasingly over the course of his career, until near the end of his career, he's actually, he's making. I think he even gives James Bond his own birthday, and he takes those silly pictures of himself, see in the cover, of him pretending he's a spy and all that sort of stuff. And he died very young, in his late 50s. He was. I have real mixed feelings about the books. I found them a little long, particularly when I got mid-career of the James Bond books. And they're really a historical piece. These Daniel Craig movies that are out now completely have no connection to these books at all. They're gung-ho, pro-British, pro-England, rah-rah, Union Jack rules the world sort of books where he can really not question anything his country does. And if you look at most of the Daniel Craig stuff, they're very kind of cynical, and he's giving up on it. He doesn't trust his country and all that sort of stuff, which is... It's not they're just action adventure movies, and they don't have any of the kind of controlled bizarreness of the James Bond novels. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Interesting books. I enjoyed reading them. I liked writing about it. I have no intention. I don't think I'll ever read Ian Fleming ever again. Okay, stay safe in the bathtub, and I'm going to try to do a few more of these with the same martini and the same white shirt. Okay, bye.